Hi, my name is Jeremy.
And I am Aubrey.
And welcome to the very first episode of the Tentacle Difficulties Podcast. Welcome to our very first episode of the Tentacle Difficulties Podcast. To get started, I guess we should just tell you a little bit about who we are and why we're here today. And we're basically just two people who are not formally educated in any way, shape, or form about film, but we just really enjoy weird films, particularly horror films, genre films, just goofy, really low budget, kind of trashy films sometimes. But it's really kind of a passion of ours, and we've been thinking about starting a podcast about it for a long time, just to really research these films that we love so much a little bit more and just learn more about them for the fuck of it. Yeah,
to have fun and maybe along the way encourage some people who wouldn't give it the time of day.
Yeah. I think going forward, this podcast might be a little more focused than what you're about to hear. Basically, like, today we're not going to cover just one film. We're not going to cover even just like a trilogy or maybe a franchise. We're going to start to tackle a whole subgenre of films, of which there are hundreds of. But we're here today to talk about the Italian subgenre of Giallo.
Giallo.
Giallo, or Gialli, I guess, is technically the plural form of them. But I'm probably going to butcher that, as well as a lot of other things as we're talking about this, because there's a lot of weird Italian names, and I'm very white and not Italian. So yeah, we're going to butcher some shit, but fuck it. We're here to just let it rip. So I know there are plenty of horror fans that are already aware of this, but for those who aren't aware, what is a Giallo film? Basically, a Giallo is just a very kind of specific, hyper-stylized subgenre of Italian horror / thriller whodunit type films that first started to become popular in the 1960s and into the 1970s. The word Giallo literally just means yellow in Italian. The original inspiration for these films goes back to 1929, and it comes from a long-running series of pulp, crime, murder mystery novels called Il Giallo Mondadori. These fictional and cheap paperback novels featured very simple, bright yellow color design, hence the word Giallo. The publisher actually still publishes to this day. Many of the original books were simply Italian translations of popular British and American novels from authors like Agatha Christie, Raymond Chandler, Edgar Allan Poe. And the Giallo films were very influenced by these particular novels, but also the American film noir movies from the 1940s and 50s, and also a smaller crop of German expressionist films called krimis from the 1950s and 60s. These Italian films we're going to get into, though, they took all these kinds of noir whodunit ideas and really pushed them to a new level. We're talking about some pretty extreme scenes of violence, a lot of surrealism, trippy, dreamy visuals, way more so than those old traditional whodunit stories. What do you like about Giallo films, Aubrey?
Oh, my favorite thing is the visuals, of course. I think they're beautiful, really well shot. I love the colors. They usually feature black gloves, knives or blades, telephones. A red telephone is a key piece.
A lot of times, yeah.
The music is really cool, and a lot of them usually have experimental soundtracks, and they center a lot of the movies on the arts, like theater, fashion, photography, and they also have a lot of nudity and sex, which, is a perk.
They sure do. Yeah, I mean, some of my notes I took down here, like, what defines a Giallo, and kind of a lot of the elements that you will find in a lot of these films. And yeah, I mean, like I said, a murder mystery plot first and foremost, often revolving around a black-gloved killer with, quote, psychosexual desires or
Moral
often
depravity.
Yeah, or often suffering, some sort of psychological madness or trauma. But the term psychosexual in particular comes up a lot, or, a sex maniac. But yeah, like you said, the visuals, very extravagant set and costume designs, very vivid, bold colors and patterns, and just like the architecture and the buildings and the locations these films were shot in are stunningly beautiful too. And a lot of these cinematographers and directors just do such a good job of capturing them, interplaying with like light and stuff through these ornate places that they shot everything, and man, they're just really a feast for the eyes.
They really are. One of my favorite things is how different the sets can be, but how they all have a very similar feel to them. You can really tell when something is a giallo because of the set and the way it's designed. Whether it's mid-century modern in approach because of the time period that those films were made, or if it is more traditional Italian architecture, which both of them are gorgeous in the way that they do things.
Yeah, I mean, it even goes, there's obviously a lot of these films that are set in Rome and Venice and, places like that, which feature really beautiful buildings and architecture. But there's a lot of them that are also shot in other parts of the world, in France or London or even New York. But they always really find the best possible locations. I'm always kind of just like blown away by these weird, like a lot of times there's like a big house, like a big fancy house in the middle of nowhere with a whole bunch of crazy windows, and like I don't know, the just the locations they found for a lot of these are really fucking cool.
The villas, when they go out to their villas, yeah. Oh man.
But yeah, there's a lot of other things that you'll see in a lot of these movies. Killer point of view sequences are very common, which you would continue to be very common in horror films. The American slasher films would definitely take that and run with it. There's a lot of red herrings. There's a lot of gardeners in particular in these movies.
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of gardeners looking through windows, holding the shears in their hands, just menacingly. You think you're gonna get killed by them a lot.
A lot of these films also feature, long evocative titles. Oh
yeah,
your vice is a locked door and only I have the key, and the Red Queen kills 7 times, and the alternate title for the psychic, I think it's like Murder to the Tune of 7 Black Notes. I love it.
Sounds like old early 2000s hardcore bands.
Yeah, I definitely Fear Before the March of Flames could definitely be a giallo film.
Definitely.
There's that band, The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die. That could definitely be a giallo film.
That would definitely be another one.
But yeah, I guess we start getting into the movies a little bit here. When it comes to giallo, there's basically there's a lot of different directors and filmmakers that have worked on these types of movies, and not just Italian ones. There's people all over the world who have emulated this kind of particular style. We'll get into plenty of that later as well. But there's basically 4 main players in the art of making a giallo film. You're going to hear... Anytime you're either listening to not just this, but anytime anybody's talking about giallo films, you're going to hear 4 names come up a lot. You're going to hear about Mario Bava. You're going to hear about Dario Argento. You're going to hear about Sergio Martino, and you're going to hear about Lucio Fulci.
Yes.
But I guess we should really get right into it here. We do have a little bit more info we'll bring up about those 4 directors in particular as we talk here, because their movies are definitely going to come up. But to get right into things here, we watched 30 giallo films this month so far, this blessed January Giallo 2024. And as we're recording today, it's only the 28th, so we're still going to watch a few more, I'm sure, by the end of the month. Pulling up our trusty Letterboxd here so I can tell you exactly everything that we watched, and then we're going to get into a few of them more specifically here. But so far this month, we kicked off the month in spectacular fashion watching Sergio Martino's Torso from 1973.
Torso.
If you've seen the trailer, that's going to be hilarious to you. Otherwise, you're just going to think we're stupid, but that's fine too.
Yeah.
Then we also watched A Bay of Blood from 1971, Mario Bava. We watched Stage Fright from 1987, which I believe is Michele Soavi. And then we watched Blowout, Brian De Palma's Blowout from 1981.
John Travolta's in that one.
And then we traveled way forward in the future to watch a more modern, quote, neo Giallo, and we watched Knife Plus Heart. We watched A Blade in the Dark from 1983, which is directed by Mario Bava's son, Lamberto Bava, who would also direct Demons, which fucking rules too, but not a Giallo.
That was kind of fun because you went to see that one at the theater for the Giallo January, and I was sick at home, so we watched two different cuts. Yeah,
apparently the one we saw at that I got to see at the theater when you were sick is like 12 minutes longer or something, because it was a made-for-TV like miniseries. It wasn't just one film, but yeah, the one you watch on Shudder or whatever apparently is like a theatrical version that was a little shorter.
It was kind of funny because we also realized there are different ways that they were dubbed. So certain lines that I read were different than the ones that you had.
Definitely. But I mean, continuing on with the movies we watched here, we watched 1971's The Black Belly of the Tarantula. We watched a 90s Dario Argento movie called Trauma for 1993, which I will say is not particularly good, but it has maybe the most batshit reveal kind of ending of any of these movies, and I kind of recommend people watch it just for that, because it's so fucking bonkers that I couldn't help but kind of enjoy it.
It was weird.
We watched another more modern Giallo inspired movie called The Neon Demon, Nicholas Winding Refn from 2016. And then we also watched some classic Lucio Fulci, Don't Torture a Duckling. We watched Don't Look Now from 1973. We watched Dario Argento's The Cat of Nine Tails from 1971. We watched All the Colors of the Dark from 1972, which I believe is another Sergio Martino film. Yes, I just double-checked that. This one we'll get into because this is probably the least favorite thing I watched all month long, but we watched a film from 2007 starring Lindsay Lohan called I Know Who Killed Me.
Ugh.
We watched another more modern take on the Giallo, The Strange Color of Your Body's Tears from 2013. We watched Lucio Fulci's The Psychic from 1977. Another new neo Giallo, Piercing from 2018. And then we went back to 1965 and watched a kind of pseudo film noir Giallo called The Possessed. Then, of course, Argento's Opera from 1987. That same night, we also watched Tiger Claws, which I will say right now, of all these films I've watched, this is probably the least Giallo. But I read about it on some lists and shit online where people said it's kind of like a kung fu 90s Giallo movie, and so I had to check it out, and I don't regret checking it out, but it's definitely not Giallo, but we can talk about that a little more later too.
I fell asleep during that one, so I did not list it on my watched movies. I would like to revisit it because, well, you keep making references and it makes me laugh.
The next movie on our list, on our letterboxd here that we watched, was another one that we got to see at the C Film Center here in Denver for their Giallo January 2024 programming, and that was Eyes of Laura Mars from 1978. We also watched a French take on a Giallo from 1970 called The Strangler, another Brian De Palma movie from 1972, Sisters.
I liked that one a lot.
We watched what is actually considered to be the first Giallo of all time, The Girl Who Knew Too Much. There's kind of an asterisk with that we can get into later, too. A movie from 1975 called Strip Nude for Your Killer.
Yeah.
And The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward from 1971. Then we also watched The Fifth Chord from 1971. And also from 1971, A Lizard and a Woman's Skin, which is another Lucio Fulci Giallo. And the last two that we watched last night was a 2012 kind of weird, quote, neo Giallo, Berberian Sound Studio. And you also revisited Fulci's The New York Ripper.
Yes, it was brutal.
So we, as you could tell, we watched a lot of fucking Giallo this month, and some of it maybe isn't even Giallo, but again, I'd read that they're Giallo adjacent, so I gave some a try anyway, and it was still fun regardless. But I will say the details about these definitely start to blur together the more you watch of them, because a lot of them are so similar that, yeah, a lot of them blur together. I'm not going to remember the specific reveal about every single one of these movies, which is why we're not going to talk about all of them anyway.
It's kind of like watching Scooby-Doo for adults.
It is kind of like Scooby-Doo for adults.
I watched a lot of episodes of Scooby-Doo as a kid, and they all blur together as well. So,
yep. There's definitely, taking a mask off. Oh, I knew it was you. Or I can't believe it's you. And then, yeah, there's definitely like some supernatural weirdness going on in some of these too, which that's not outside of the realm of the Scooby-Doo.
No. And I have to say the wardrobe is also kind of aligned with that.
Yeah, there's some hippy-dippy, like 70s, 60s kind of stuff. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. So let's get into the actual movies that we watched this month. What is something that really stood out to you? What is one of your favorites that you watched this month that you'd like to talk a little bit about?
I think Don't Torture a Duckling was my favorite.
Your absolute favorite that you watched all month long was Don't Torture a Duckling?
Well, at this very moment, that's the one that I remember as being my favorite.
Okay. That's cool. No, I like Don't Torture a Duckling a lot. So we're talking about Lucio Fulci's Don't Torture a Duckling from 1972. I guess I should say, so anybody is not afraid, we're not going to give away spoilers here. We're not going to give away the reveals of the movie. We want people who haven't seen this stuff before to be interested, and I don't want to ruin it for them. So we're going to skirt around any like big spoiler reveals. So don't feel like you have to skip ahead when we start talking about these movies. We are going to be careful of that. But anyway, Don't Torture a Duckling from 1972. I will say this is one grim fucking movie.
It really is grim. That is true.
This one basically is about, maybe this is the only one we've watched this month that is actually about a child murderer.
Yeah, it starts out really sad with that. You kind of get hit in the face with that immediately starting the movie.
And it's not just one child, like it's repeated child murders. So it's pretty fucking bleak. There's also a lot of other weird stuff I like about this movie. There's a woman who may or may not be a witch in the town that this movie takes place in that, some of the villagers obviously think that maybe she has something to do with these deaths. That's a really interesting layer that I really like about this movie.
There's definitely scapegoating because of the superstitious element.
And without giving anything away, I will say this is a pretty big fuck you to the Catholic Church on Lucio Fulci's behalf, which is something he would kind of do repeatedly in his career. And for fans of his, I think it's something they love about his films, but the film industry in Italy and Rome, from what I understand, did not really like his constant fuck yous to the Catholic Church as much as I like it.
A lot of Giallos, I think, also had that, but his really carried that theme throughout. And I think even throughout some of the movies that are not Giallos as well with him.
Yeah, and I mean, man, Don't Torture a Duckling. There's one there's one scene from this movie that really, really stands out in my mind, and it's such a weird scene. It almost seems, this is very Fulci-ish in its way, because there's one scene in this movie that just feels so out of place, but it's one of my favorite scenes of the movie, and it's absolutely fucking brutal, but like everything about it, just the way it's shot, the music happening in the scene, the just brutality of the scene, and then it basically ends with like a person who's getting killed like crawling towards like a highway, and basically reaching out for help as all of these cars and these uppity people drive by that are just trying to get to their vacation spots, and they're ignoring this poor person that had just been brutally assaulted by the side of the road, reaching out for help. And it's a really fucking grim sequence that like really kind of echoed in my head for several hours after watching this movie again.
Definitely was unsettling. That is how I feel about that scene. I think my favorite thing is this movie doesn't leave you without some elements of comedy. We could talk about that a little bit.
It's one of the greatest scenes in all of cinema, in my fucking opinion.
It's ridiculous.
For those who don't know, this isn't really giving anything away, but there is a scene in this movie where somebody falls off of a cliff, and the way the special effects are done, I don't know why, but there's something apparently metal in the face of this doll or something that they threw off a cliff to film this scene, and it sparks. It
sparks. Yep, it sparks. It hits
the side of the mountain, and you can see sparks fly, and it's one of my favorite scenes in probably any movie. And just knowing it was coming when we watched it, because this is the second time I've seen this movie. I watched it probably about a year ago for the first time, but I was so excited when that was coming up. I was like standing up off the couch and basically yelling because I just wanted to see the ridiculous fucking face spark.
I think it's hilarious. It's one of my favorite parts of the movie, and it definitely stands out, even though it... I
mean, that's not a very, like... It's not like basically like climax of the movie too.
Yeah.
But I love it. But it also doesn't take away from like how well made this film actually is. And as much as there's weird fucking, practical effects sparking when on a person falling off of a cliff, there's also there's really beautiful cinematography of like the countryside around the village where this takes place. And it really is a really well shot film, is for as ugly and grim as it is.
You also, I think, are left in the dark a lot longer on this one with who the killer is. It takes you a lot longer to figure it out. And I think when you do, it is okay, I could see it. But it does take a while for you to actually figure it out. I like that about this one.
Yeah. And I mean... Yeah, I really like this movie a lot too, and I do think it's probably one of my favorite ones I've watched. But I've thoroughly enjoyed all of the Lucio Fulci Giallos. Giallo is definitely, I mean, Fulci has several movies that tiptoe around Giallo, but I mean, that's not really what he's most well known for. He's the godfather of gore. He's known for Zombie, the Gates of Hell trilogy, people puking out their guts for obscene amounts of time while the camera doesn't ever shy away from it.
Oh, lots of eyeball issues with his movies.
Fulci loves eye trauma. Yeah,
loves it.
Fulci loves stabbing some eyes. That's for sure.
Lots of ways that he likes to have eyeball gore. That's for sure.
Yeah, Fulci, I mean, I was kind of surprised because like I'd seen Don't Torture a Duckling before. I'd seen the New York Ripper before. A Lizard in a Woman's Skin is one that we recently watched in October for the first time. Is just kind of a Giallo night on a 30 Days of Horror challenge type thing we were doing, and that movie blew me away too. Like I've really grown to like Fulci's Giallos like almost as much as I like his other stuff that he's kind of almost more well known for with horror fans.
I agree with that. To that end, I do love Woman in the Lizard Skin, but
Lizard in the Woman's Skin.
I always do that.
Yeah, I get it. I get it tangled up a lot too.
It's fine. It's how I talk, and it's how my brain works. But because I had seen it before, I didn't put it as my one I wanted to talk about. I will say that it is probably one of my favorite Giallos, though. Of all time.
I mean, like I said, it's different from a Giallo because so many Giallos are about women being killed, and like again, this one is about a child murderer, and it's not really even as Giallo to me as a lot of even as we're still talking about Don't Torture a Duckling, right?
That's what I want to talk to. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Going back,
but like
to,
that.
sorry.
But yeah, Don't Torture a Duckling doesn't feel as Giallo as even A Lizard in a Woman's Skin and The Psychic and some of the others. But I mean, it's definitely within the realm of Giallo, and it's a really brutal but great film, I think.
Yeah, it definitely has a little bit more commentary on what people do and who they blame for their problems. So it's definitely one I think everyone should visit.
Yeah, I mean, Fulci's kind of an interesting director too, because he there's a lot of these directors that worked in Giallo that they kind of came from families that were involved in the film industry, and Fulci did a little bit. I think his father maybe did produce some films or something, but from what I understand, he was primarily raised by his far-left anti-fascist mother, who really kind of nurtured his love for all of the arts. And he wanted to go to medical school, apparently, but then thought he could make more money making movies, and so he dropped out. And he worked on a lot of, like, his early career was comedies, musicals, like a lot of these directors, you know, he worked in like kind of spaghetti westerns and stuff too, but he didn't really start doing more fucked up movies that he became known for until a little later in his career. And he had some stuff happen in his personal life, you know, involving like an accident and one of his daughters being paralyzed. She's not actually dead, which is kind of the rumor actually, that she's died, but she was paralyzed. I think he lost his wife at some point, and you know, he went through some shit that'll make you kind of see the world through a little bit darker lens, and I think that's something that definitely translated in his films as he progressed throughout his career.
Yeah, there's definitely a point where there's a before some of these things happen in his personal life, and after, and you can kind of see that with his films.
Yeah, I mean, and while we're talking about, I mean, we've already mentioned some of his other Giallos briefly. I mean, yeah, we can talk just a tiny bit about A Lizard in a Woman's Skin again. Like I said, it's almost like a hippie exploitation Giallo, where it revolves around a woman who lives in kind of like a lavish apartment building, and her neighbor has these kind of crazy drug-fueled acid, cocaine, marijuana, drug-fueled orgy kind of parties.
Very psychedelic.
And she starts having like dreams and kind of like fantasizing that she's having a relationship with this female neighbor of hers, and then a murder happens and a mystery tries to unfold around a bunch of, you know, hippies that have done a lot of acid and don't really know the difference between reality and their drug trips at times. And it's a really fucking cool, trippy movie.
I really like that one. I think one of my favorite things about that one is the fur coat.
The fur coat, yeah.
The fur coat.
There's a lot of really nice fur coats in Giallo.
Yes, I don't really need a fur coat. But I want something that looks like it would feel like those two. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lizard on a Woman's Skin is great. The Psychic we watched for the very first time, which I liked a lot too. And like, of all of Fulci's films, this is probably the most tame one I've ever seen, as far as like, there's really not over the top violence and gore and kill scenes. It's a much more kind of subdued, like, murder mystery. And there's a really cool kind of thing that's been talked about a lot because Quentin Tarantino notoriously loved it, and it has to do with a lady's watch and like a very particular alarm that goes off on her watch, and that ties into the story. And I don't know, I just really like that one, and it almost didn't feel like a Fulci film.
Yeah, I can't think of any scene that was really gory. I can't picture anyone in that.
I guess if we're talking about these, I guess I do want to talk about one more thing about the A Lizard in a Woman's Skin. And this is what kind of, the Psychic feels different because it doesn't have any of these like really crazy off the wall, out of nowhere scenes. But A Lizard in a Woman's Skin has one of the fucking craziest scenes in any of these Giallos too. And it really makes no sense at all within the context of the whole movie. But basically, a lady stumbles into a room in a hospital where there's like these dogs that are kind of flayed open and hooked up to machines.
It's like the blood pumping for them. It's
super disgusting. And this is a true story. Like, apparently, these are not real dogs that were used in this film. But the general audiences thought they actually were. And like, Lucio Fulci had to go on trial with the person who helped them with the special effects in that movie to prove that they did not disembowel real dogs, at least in this movie. And as far as I know, no dogs are killed in these movies. I will say that like, if you're squeamish about animal violence in movies. Giallo films might not be the most accessible thing to you in just Italian cinema in general, because there definitely are real animals hurt on screen sometimes. Like I know there's a lizard in an Argento movie, and there's definitely bugs, and I mean there's some throwing of some cats and stuff like that. It's fucked up, and obviously I'm glad that the film industry doesn't really take kindly to that kind of shit anymore, but I'm also not going to sit here and act like Italian cinema is the only like place that ever had this violence against animals in movies. Like there's horrible things that have happened to animals in movies that are filmed all around the world. But anyway, the dogs in A Lizard in Woman's Skin, absolutely not real dogs, just really good practical effects that they had to prove were practical effects.
It was really out of place, though. I don't know what it was doing in the movie.
Yeah, it really makes no sense in the whole grand scheme of the movie. It literally is just like the doctor like says something like, oh, she saw something that she shouldn't have. Maybe she should be a little less curious. And like that's really all it's ever mentioned. But back to the psychic. That's why the psychic feels different, because it doesn't have anything like off the wall like that. But a lot of times Fulci films, there's at least one kind of weird, crazy scene in them. So
we watched 3 Fulci films?
Well, we watched 3. You also watched the New
4.
York Ripper,
That's
which
right.
I have seen before, so we can talk about quite a bit. We can still talk about that one. I mean, I didn't watch it this month, but I've seen it before. I was watching the Royal Rumble. I was watching wrestling when you watched this last night, in all honesty. But yeah, I like that movie a lot. It definitely feels a little less Giallo, more like gritty grindhouse 42nd Street slasher to me, but it's definitely on the cusp of Giallo, and I do like it quite a bit, even though it is really relentlessly brutal.
Yeah, it is. I think it's oh man, that one has a lot of things, because I watched it last night. It feels like that one is more exploitative almost. And I know that has to do with the storyline. And
I think that's intentional because, I mean, clearly, like, it takes place in these grimy 70s, like, porn theaters and stuff like that.
Well, and there's one character.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm remembering that, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, and there's one character that, to appease their husband, puts themselves in a situation where they are going out and...
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
So she basically goes out into the real world and masturbates in public and records the sounds of it to give the tapes to her husband, who gets off on it. So that's part of the storyline. It doesn't give out a whole lot other than that being part of it. But that is part of the exploitation in that film. And there are layers to the exploitation because each character has a different way they're exploited.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that's all the Fulci ones we watched this month. And yeah, primarily what we started talking about was the film Don't Torture a Duckling. And I definitely think maybe check that out first before any, I don't know, maybe Torture a Duckling or The Psychic maybe could be like an entry point for you before you get into Lizard on a Woman's Skin,
because that one gets weird,
or New York Ripper. But if you're already versed in the world of Fulci and the fucked up madness that happens in them, then dive right into Lizard on a Woman's Skin. I think you'll like it quite a bit.
I agree. It's awesome.
And I said grimy 70s porn theaters for New York Ripper, but I think that's actually like early 80s, but whatever. Late 70s, early 80s New York, just grimy and gross regardless.
Yes.
But anyway, moving on. We got a little sidetracked there, primarily trying to talk about one movie, but you can't just talk about one Fulci.
No, you can't. There's too many. Fulci could have a whole episode on his own.
So I guess, I mean, we can get into the whole argument of what is or isn't a Giallo. I guess one thing that like I really want to bring attention to is not all Italian horror films are Giallos, and not all Giallos are Italian either. When I was first getting into these movies, I was kind of stupid, and I just thought that all like Italian horror movies were called Giallos, and it's definitely like a more specific thing than that. But there's definitely, but like I said, not all Giallos are Italian either. People have emulated this style worldwide, and I think one of the like most interesting movies we watched this month was a film a much more recent film. I believe it's from 2018, maybe. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it here. But we watched
Knife and Heart?
Knife Plus Heart, yeah.
Knife Plus Heart, yeah. That one was really good. I liked that one. Yeah, that one's French.
Yeah, from 2018. It's a French film directed by Jan Gonzalez. I expected to not be able to pronounce the French director's name, but that one was actually pretty easy. So, score. But I guess what I really like about this movie and what stood out to me about this movie is this is by far the gayest movie we watched this month. And I mean that in the best possible way. It was a really different, kind of refreshing take on these films. And it was really, really interesting to see, especially in like a more modern take.
Yeah, it is still supposed to take place in 1979. It's just filmed more recently. So it still takes place in that 1970s world.
It takes place in a 1970s gay porn world. Yeah, like the kind of main character in the movie is like a producer for like gay porn films in France in the 70s. And there starts to be murders, and their cast members are kind of picked off one by one. And the fucking killer in this movie has one of the most awesome weapons in any like Giallo movie, because he kills people with a big dildo with like a switchblade that comes out of the end of it, and it's gnarly.
It is. Some of those deaths are pretty intense, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's very very in your face, like sexual, and even the kills are very kind of weird erotic things that end up in murder, and it's just a really fucking interesting movie. And out of, like I said, of all the like quote neo Giallo films we watched, which we watched a good handful of more modern films like that were inspired by Giallo, but I think this one is definitely my favorite one. I don't know, it's just the one that stands out to me just because it's different.
I really liked it. I thought it was really beautiful. Another one that was, the colors in that one are more of pinks and blues, and I really liked the way that it looked. Some of the scenes had a very ethereal feel to them as well, very dream state, very like, I don't know. It was really well done, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Knife Plus Heart, 2018. I think definitely check it out, especially even if you're a person that doesn't really like the vibe of the older like 60s, 70s Giallo movies. The pacing sometimes can be a little hard for some people, but like I think Knife Plus Heart is like a very easy and accessible watch for anybody that's curious about this kind of stuff.
It keeps it moving, and I don't think that one ever had a moment that lulled or got boring.
I agree. And yeah, I mean, I definitely want to bring that up because I knew that was one that like we both had kind of marked down as ones we liked a lot that we wanted to talk about. What is another one that you wanted to talk about?
I also really liked A Bay of Blood. A Bay of Blood, I think, was really good, and you can see how it influenced all of the slasher movies that came out in America after. You can see some scenes that definitely played a big role on movies that we both enjoy.
Yeah, so Bay of Blood is from 1971, directed by Mario Bava, the maestro of the macabre. But he also did some Giallo films, including what is often considered the very first Giallo film of all time, which is The Girl Who Knew Too Much. Although there's a lot of kind of debate on whether that's actually the first true Giallo of all time, because it wasn't in color. And as we've talked about a little bit already, color is very much a staple of Giallo, bright, vivid colors. And The Girl Who Knew Too Much definitely like has, a lot of elements that Giallo's took from, but Blood and Black Lace, which came out a year after that in 1964, is probably truer to the first real Giallo to me, because it introduces that vivid color. You get more kills. You get kind of the traditional Giallo killer look of like a black hat, like a stocking over the face, and black gloves and a trench coat kind of killer. But Mario Bava would continue to make other horror films throughout the 60s and into the 70s. And 1971, Bay of Blood is another Giallo-ish movie that, as Aubrey said, was very, very influential to the American slasher movement. There's one scene in particular that there is no fucking way Tom Savini wasn't inspired by when they did Friday the 13th.
Yeah, it's very obvious when you see the movie which one it is.
Yeah, it involves two people on a bed and a spear going through them as they're, having a fun time. And yeah, it's definitely different from the famous scene with Kevin Bacon in Friday the 13th, but like there's no way that it didn't influence that. And even just like the whole like kind of vibe of this movie I felt to be like very Friday the 13th anyway, despite it, coming out 8, 9 years earlier at least.
I don't think there's any redeeming characters in this movie either. Like all of them seem like they are awful people.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's definitely a thing you'll see in other Giallos. But yeah, you're not wrong about that in this movie as well. I'd heard about this movie for a long time, never saw it. It was a very first time watch for me this year, and I'm very glad I did check it out. It feels more like the other Giallo films maybe of the time, like the Argento and Martino Giallo films of like the late 60s, earlier 70s, more so than it feels like Bava's early films.
Yeah.
Which his early films, Blood and Black Lace and The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which we talked about a little bit, like they feel very kind of like old Hollywood-y to me.
They have campiness to them.
Still. I mean, they're still great. I still like them a lot. But yeah, Bay of Blood definitely seems a little more like what we really came to know as the Giallo genre and obviously American slasher stuff. I think I maybe mentioned it way earlier when we were listing off, all the movies we watched. I think I said there was an asterisk by The Girl Who Knew Too Much that we watched. And I mean, part of the asterisk I said is because it's in black and white and it's, Giallo's known for color. But the other reason I said there's an asterisk because I guess there's a completely different cut. We actually watched a version of it called Evil Eye, which I guess was the cut for like American and British audiences. And I've heard that is a far inferior cut of the film. And I guess it kind of leans more into like comedy of it a little more than like the horror thriller side of it. So I have to put an asterisk by that because, like, I didn't love that movie. I could definitely see its influence, but I would really like to see the actual true The Girl Who Knew Too Much movie and not the Evil Eye cut because I have a feeling I would like it a little bit better.
I agree. That's one of the things that I hope to find eventually to be able to watch because I do think that it suffered a little bit from that comedy, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, I mean, I guess you can clearly see the name of the title there. I mean, a clear influence by Hitchcock as well, who The Man Who Knew Too Much, which he actually made twice, was definitely a big influence. So yeah, aside from, authors like Edgar Allan Poe and Agatha Christie and stuff, Alfred Hitchcock is definitely somebody who has kind of fingerprints all over this film as well.
You can see nods to it for sure.
Yeah.
I really expected us to have watched more Mario Bava, but apparently we only watched those two.
Yeah, well, I still I don't necessarily like even though he technically is like credited with like creating it in a film sense at least, I definitely I kind of think of just like I said, Black Sunday and Black Sabbath, and I kind of think of his weird like stuff like that a little more than Giallo, but I mean he's definitely super influential with all of the stuff like that he did.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about all of the main four that we brought up with Lucio Fulci and Dario Argento, Mario Bava, and Sergio Martino.
Yeah. And I mean, apparently Bava also was like an artist in addition to like a cinematographer and director. Like he also did like special effects, practical effects for movies like Hercules and Kaltiki, the Immortal Monster in the 50s before he started making his own films. And he was also a painter, and he created a number of like the matte and glass paintings that would actually like be used for his films, both in like, poster art and backgrounds and all that stuff too.
It's really interesting how many of these directors had lives in other arts and what they did with it. We can talk more about each of them.
Or just like family members that also did stuff, like his son Lamberto Bava, which I think we mentioned earlier already too. He directed a movie called A Blade in the Dark, which we watched this movie, and I don't love that movie, but I definitely enjoy it. Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, either come from families or also have, kids or somebody who goes on to work in similar films. But I guess just to keep it rolling here, I guess since we've talked about Fulci and Bava, we may as well talk a little bit about the other two. Obviously, Dario Argento, while Mario Bava may have invented the Giallo film, everybody knows that Dario Argento perfected the Giallo film. Probably what people basically call like kind of the greatest Giallos ever made. Like it's either Deep Red or Tenebrae a lot of times, or what I see pop up on most people's lists, and those movies are fantastic. But I mean, there's so many of Argento's films that deserve mentioning as well. And I guess I will say too, like Argento was definitely my gateway into all of this stuff. If it wasn't for me seeing Suspiria when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I don't think this like door to weirdo Italian cinema would have ever been open to me. But I decided to rent Suspiria, I believe from Netflix mail order DVD service at the time. And the first time I ever watched that movie, it just blew me away, primarily with just like the visuals and just how like every frame of that movie is like a piece of art. Now that movie, a lot of people argue, is it a Giallo? Is it not a Giallo? For me, it's what I call a fringe Giallo.
Yeah.
Where it's like half Giallo, but there's definitely supernatural stuff going on with witches, and it's not a true Giallo in my opinion, but I did feel compelled to bring it up because if it wasn't for that film, I would have never looked into any of these other films that we're talking about today.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I would say that Suspiria helped open my eyes to a lot of these films, and I probably wouldn't have gone as far into these types of movies if I hadn't seen that and seen it when I did. I also think that it is one of the prettiest movies ever made.
So much so that you painted our bathroom to look like a bathroom in that movie.
Yeah, it's got some of the MC Escher paintings, which is a big theme throughout the movie. A lot of the set design in that one has MC Escher paintings as the motif.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess to get into the actual Giallos that Argento directed, we watched a few of them this month. I already mentioned because of the completely crazy reveal at the end. I mentioned Trauma. Definitely not Argento's best work again.
No, was my least favorite of the three of his that we watched this month.
Yeah. It's definitely, it's out there, but I have to credit it for just how crazy it gets. But the other ones we watched this month, we watched The Cat of Nine Tails for the first time. So we've now seen what Argento has, what is called the Animal Trilogy, and it's 3 films. It's The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, The Cat of Nine Tails, and Four Flies on Grey Velvet. The Cat of Nine Tails is the only one I hadn't seen prior to this year, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's kind of a by-the-book Giallo, but I will say there's a crazy car chase sequence in that movie.
The car chase is awesome. It's Fast and Furious.
It's executed really fucking well, and like I was just really surprised that there was like a full-on car chase sequence in the middle of this Argento movie. And maybe I'm crazy and there's something like that he's done in another movie that I just don't remember right now, but I thought it was like a first I'd seen from Argento, and I thought it was pretty fucking cool.
It was one of the best parts of that movie for sure.
The one I really want to talk about, and this is not a first time watch for me, I've seen this movie before, but honestly right around that same time where I just was talking about where I saw Suspiria, we rewatched Dario Argento's Opera from 1987, and this is definitely one of my favorite movies that we watched this month.
Definitely. I think it has some parts that will last with you, that you will think about over and over and over again, like the tape with the needles under the eye.
Very, very famous imagery. I think if you pull up just like the one sheet, like the poster or like, cover, DVD cover or whatever for Opera, you will see a woman with her mouth duct taped shut and a little row of needles taped directly under her eyes. And this is meant for her to watch as the killer does things to other people, and she cannot close her eyes. Otherwise, obviously, she's going to get poked by needles.
I think this one's also interesting because it goes into the lore of the Curse of Macbeth.
It does. And there's a really cool, pulpy kind of thing I like about it revolving around birds. Are they crows or ravens?
I have to look that up.
I get them confused. I want to say ravens, but maybe they're crows.
I don't think ravens live out. I don't know.
But I think but there's a cool pulpy, it's kind of silly if you overthink it, but there's a pulpy thing that they use in there where it's the birds can remember people, and they use that in the film, and it results in one of the craziest shot sequences of any Giallo film ever filmed, in my opinion. And there's a scene in an opera house.
It's ravens.
It is ravens. Okay, cool. But there's a scene in an opera house where there's all these ravens that are unleashed, and they're going crazy. They're pecking at people's eyes. They're swarming people. And I mean, I really don't even know how they filmed all of this. I heard there was a rotating crane involved because it's supposed to be the bird's eye view in certain sequences of this. And it's so impressive and crazy to watch. And there's real crows flying around. There's puppets. There's mechanical ones. Apparently Dario Argento is just screaming and shooting guns in the air behind the fucking camera in order to scare the birds and have them just go crazy in there.
It was an intense and insane scene. And I think it's made more intense and more insane when you remember that it's filmed in
1987, I think.
87.
Yeah, but
that's right.
But man, it's spectacular, and I remembered liking that movie, but I thoroughly do love opera now.
It was the year before that he did the runway show for Trussardi.
I have no idea. I don't know about this. This is something you researched.
Oh, yes. Okay, so Dario Argento was very into fashion, a lot of fashion stuff. And between opera and one of his other movies, I don't remember which one, and right now I can't get that to pull up.
Well, whatever. We don't.
Anyway, he did a runway show, but it was it was done in a way that it was a Giallo runway show. They even had fake rain. They had everything.
And it was like a murder mystery, fat runway show, basically.
The models acted like they died. It was, you can find it on YouTube and watch it. I did watch it. It was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, opera. I don't know if you had never ever seen a Dario Argento film. I don't know if opera is the very first one I would say you should watch, but it's definitely something that if you're into his films at all, you can't miss. It's really, really great. And it just, man, there's one shot I can remember of going up a spiral staircase with the cameras rotating with it as it's going up, and just some of the stuff that goes on. And again, I'm an idiot. I've never been to film school. I don't know shit about the technical terms behind cinematography and stuff, but all I know is there are shots in that movie that blow me away.
There are things that would look really, really cool.
Look really cool, man.
Yeah.
But that's enough about Argento for now. There's no shortage of people talking about Argento. And while I consider myself to have been a fan of Giallo for quite a while, I kind of had a blind spot to the films of Sergio Martino. I think Torso is maybe the only one I'd ever seen prior to this year. But I mean, we watched a few of his films, and I really like every one we watched. We started off with Torso, which I think is really cool, and it's half gritty kind of slasher movie, and then the second half of it kind of goes full Hitchcockian thriller. There's a woman in a house with a killer, and she's kind of trying to hide from him, and even
She's smarter than I would have been.
Yeah, there's one thing in particular where she was trying to hide basically any kind of items or anything clothing that she may have left out to let the killer know that there was somebody else in the house. And she's walking around, she's picking up her socks and all kinds of stuff, and Aubrey's like, "Why is she doing that?" And it's because she's just trying to hide any evidence that she's there from the killer. And
Yeah,
it's
she
like,
made the room look like she was never in it. Like curled up the bed, made it look like nobody had been staying there and it had been unused.
these films are filled, and like just horror films in general are filled with like instances of obviously of like, no, don't do that. Why are you doing that? Why are you running upstairs? Why are you putting yourself in bad situations you know you're not going to you can't get out of? But this one, like, honestly, like the reason
She
like,
was a badass.
she thought of stuff that like we didn't even really think about to hide her presence from the killer, and it's really good thriller like for the second half of the movie. And yeah, I like that one quite a bit. I'm really glad I revisited it.
She did not come across as a femme fatale. She was definitely like, no, she was a smart woman. She was an educated woman, and it was kind of cool to see that kind of play out on screen.
I mean, and that's something that kind of like is played out in a lot of these movies, though, where like there are a lot of very independent women, like women that are like middle-class women that have stable jobs, can provide for themselves. They don't want to be, quote, kept is the term that comes up in a lot of them.
They're not reserved to just being a mistress or a wife. They have a full character. They're built out and made completely fleshed out, and you actually can like them.
You can. And I mean, there's
sometimes.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of them that get brutally killed and, you know, various other bad things happen to them. But I think compared to like a lot of, you know, like horror, like particularly like slasher films you go to see later where there's just like one final girl and a bunch of other like dumb stereotypical type of characters, like these films really do like, I don't know. I really think like the women in these films have a lot more agency, and just I think they're stronger characters than like, you know, the American films that came after would present them as a lot of times.
Yeah, they're given better jobs in these roles as well. It definitely gives nod to the women's movement at the time and the way that they were making sure they had a place in the world. You know, it was kind of cool to not just see the characters. I lost my train of thought.
It's all right. But I mean, we watched a few of Sergio Martino's movies. We watched Torso, which we enjoyed a lot. All the Colors of the Dark is another Sergio Martino film. I will admit that is one of the ones I talked about where like the details of these kind of blur together, and I don't really remember a whole lot about this movie in particular, except it's another one starring Edwige Fenech, which is a French actress who shows up in a lot of Sergio Martino's films. She was actually married to Sergio Martino's brother, Luciano, I believe is his name, and he was the producer on a lot of Sergio Martino's Giallo films that Edwige Fenech starred in.
Not a Giallo, more modern movie, but you can see heavily influenced by her is The Love Witch. Her entire look in that movie is based on Edwige Fenech.
So yeah, if you've seen the movie The Love Witch, the main character in that movie basically looks exactly like Edwige Fenech. It's
really cool. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember liking that movie, but like I said, that's just one that like the details didn't really stick with me as much as Torso, and probably the other one of his we watched, which is The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward.
Oh, yes. Well, I think the big difference between those is that one has a satanic sex cult.
That's right. All the Colors of the Dark does have like a satanic sex cult. That's right. I forgot about that, but that is that one.
Yep.
Where it almost feels a little like Rosemary's Baby-ish, a little less Giallo. But The Strange Vice of Miss Ward is maybe, we talked about the term psychosexual earlier and how it's something that comes up a lot, and like this one might be the truest sense of that.
Yeah.
To me.
I think so. I think it definitely delves more into that world. Man, you watch that movie, every single man in that movie sucks.
Every single man in that movie does suck. But what's also interesting about that movie is it's one of the few instances where, I mean, you end up finding out why later, but it is for like half the movie, it's almost kind of refreshing because there's so many of these movies where I think that, like, you know, women will say there's a killer stalking me, there's somebody outside looking at me, and people just want to act like they're crazy. They don't want to believe them. But in this movie, everybody actually does seem to take her seriously.
Yeah, they do.
And so it kind of gives you some hope. But then by the end of it, and I will say there's like 3 or 4 kind of twists in this movie. And this one's really cool in a sense where like the actual like killer, like the black gloved killer that's lurking around the plot of this thing isn't necessarily even like the main villain of the movie. And it took more twists than I anticipated. And I thoroughly enjoyed The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward.
We watched it and then I watched it again just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I didn't miss anything. I'm glad I rewatched it because I definitely caught more things, but I didn't miss what I thought I missed.
Yeah. So yeah, shout out to Sergio Martino, who is still alive, and I think he's doing more like television kind of stuff than filmmaking anymore, which from what I understand in Italy is way more profitable. Like after the kind of early 90s, the film industry, particularly for these kind of horror films, really just kind of dried up and went away. And a lot of the people who worked on these films just went on to do television instead, because that's just where the money is at, I guess, and where their industry shifted.
That's kind of interesting.
But that's probably enough talk about the big 4 directors of Giallo. There's so much more out there that we also watched. We'll run through just a few things I wanted to mention real quick before we wrap this all up. I guess one thing I really enjoyed getting into this year with our January Giallo was the films of Brian De Palma. I mean, I've always kind of been a huge Scarface fan, and I've seen Carrie a whole bunch of times. But outside of that, I honestly wasn't really super familiar with like a lot of Brian De Palma's earlier works, but Blowout from 1981 starring John Travolta was one of my very favorite things I watched this month.
It was really good. I also agree with that.
Yeah, it's about a guy who he's like a sound engineer recording sound effects and stuff like that for horror movies, and he's out one night recording some sound effects at like a river. You know, he's getting some nature sounds, some trees rustling, some, you know, bugs chirping at night, that kind of stuff. And he ends up kind of witnessing a car drive off the road and plunge into like a lake or river or something. It's some sort of form of water. But he basically ends up going down and swimming out there and like finds, you know, there's one person in the car that's dead and there's a woman who's alive and still inside, and he's able to rescue her. And because right before that accident happened and he jumped in to save her, he has all this audio recordings that he had recorded while he was out there, and he's listening back to it, and he starts to realize that it wasn't a tire blowout that caused that accident. The tire was shot out. And so it's this big kind of unraveling mystery about what happened, and, you know, who that woman was he saved and who she was with. And it's a really, really interesting movie. And we also watched Sisters of Brian De Palma, which I found very interesting as well.
It kind of reminded me of Basket Case.
a little bit like Basket Case, yeah. There's something to do with, you know, a twin that, a Siamese twin that had been separated, for sure. But yeah, it's very, very loosely like Basket Case. That's definitely not at all like what the movie itself is like, aside from that one similarity.
Yeah, I guess.
But yeah, Brian De Palma I've also heard there's another one I haven't watched, I guess, Dressed to Kill. I have never seen before, and I don't know anything about that movie at all, but I keep seeing the term problematic come up when I search for it, so I'm a little hesitant. I don't know what that even means, but I'm sure, maybe next year I'll, check that one out too. But for now, we just watched Sisters and Blowout, and I don't regret that at all.
Yeah, I'm excited to revisit or visit more from Brian De Palma from the films that I haven't seen. So,
yeah. I guess, so as far as all the modern and Giallo-inspired films that we watched, I know we talked about one we enjoyed quite a bit. I know we mentioned probably my least favorite thing that I watched all this month was 2007?
Yeah, 2007.
I Know Who Killed Me, and who does this movie star?
Lindsay Lohan.
Which, okay, so this movie, when it first came out, I had heard nothing but horrible, horrible things about it. And for whatever reason, in the last, few years, I feel like the horror community has kind of started reevaluating it. And I've seen a lot of people that say it's kind of worth watching. So I wanted to watch it, and I was very, very open-minded. I wanted to like it.
Same.
But I really fucking didn't like this movie.
No, it suffers from, I think, being in 2007 was not a great year. I gotta be honest. We dressed like crap. Things were not done well. I don't know. It suffers from being from 2007 partially.
I mean, I think, and Lindsay Lohan is very publicly kind of, had issues with, mental issues and stuff like that. I'm not trying to shit on her at all. Who knows what she was going through when she, filmed this. I kind of get the impression it wasn't a great time in her life, but man, is she really not good in that movie. And I mean, really not good.
Very forced.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not going to take much more time to shit on things. We're mostly here to celebrate things we like, but I will just say that is my least favorite thing I watched this year. But a lot of other people apparently have come around to liking this. So, I mean, check it out if you feel like it, by all means.
Sometimes you got to waste time on things that you don't like so you can know what you do.
Piercing is another more modern one from 2018 we watched, and I think you liked this one a little better than I did.
Yeah, I really liked it. I really did.
What did you really like about Piercing?
I think I liked that they were both crazy and they're both psychotic, and you know that from the beginning. It's very and the way they play off of each other, it's kind of a romance.
It definitely is. The most interesting thing about this movie to me is that it uses the original songs from actual Giallo films from the 70s. Most notably, it uses the theme song from Deep Red, which that's probably my favorite scene in the whole movie, actually. It's a really cool, I'm pretty sure this is the Deep Red scene anyway in the movie, but it's a really cool split scene sequence where this girl and this guy are kind of meeting up for the first time, and half the screen is the girl getting ready on her way, and the other half is the guy preparing in his hotel room. But they have this just driving fucking goblin theme to Deep Red going, and I really like that scene, but I also have a hard time with this movie because it also, during the end credits, also has the theme from Tenebrae.
Oh, yeah.
And as much as I kind of love any opportunity to hear these songs, because I truly love them, and we've seen the band Goblin live a couple times now too, because we like it so much. But as much as I like those songs, I have a really hard time disassociating the songs with the movies themselves. It just doesn't feel right for me to hear the Deep Red theme or the Tenebrae theme with the Piercing thing. And so I've kind of flip-flopped back and forth on if I thought that was really cool or if they should have done something else. Because I don't know, it's a weird thing where I don't necessarily want to hear the Halloween theme song over the end credits of another movie that was a completely different movie that was inspired by Halloween, because it's that theme song is so synonymous with that one movie. And I think these Goblin songs are the same thing with those Argento films to me. That's why I feel I go back and forth whether I thought it was cool or if I thought it was kind of a weird cop-out.
I get it. I was about to make a point where I was well, you could use Bad Moon Rising for any werewolf movie, but that's also not a song made just for
it wasn't
American.
Composed for American Werewolf.
So
I
can't use that argument. Never mind.
But I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting film nonetheless. There's some other weird things about it I don't fully understand, particularly at the beginning of the movie where a guy may or may not be contemplating murdering his baby or some shit. I don't even fucking understand what that was about.
Yeah, anything that I've read skips over that. It doesn't include any of that in the explanations of the movie. So
yeah. I mean, I again, when I was when I was like, I make big lists on my phone all the time. I listen to podcasts. I read lists online. I compile lists of movies that I haven't seen before and movies that I want to watch. And that's what I did for a lot of these films that we watched this month. And, there's some movies that came up on a Giallo or a Neo Giallo list that I watched. I'm like, this isn't fucking Giallo at all, but I still liked it. And Tiger Claws is a movie I want to talk about real briefly because, as I mentioned way earlier, I've heard it described as a 90s kung fu Giallo. And it very, 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 very loosely kind of is. But it's definitely like a really low budget, straight to video, like action, trashy thing. But it features some ridiculous scenes. Because it's about like a martial arts style called Tiger Style, and it definitely has like scenes where it's just like some claws, like human hands, like flying around a screen in front of like a black or blue background, and then there's like blood flying everywhere, and you hear like like actual tiger sounds dubbed in, and it's so fucking ridiculous that I had like a great time watching it. But I definitely wouldn't. It's definitely a big stretch to call that Giallo.
Yeah. I'm going to watch it eventually.
You should watch it eventually. From what I understand, there's 3 of them. So maybe we can do another podcast at some point with the Tiger Claws trilogy.
Oh, yeah. Can I say one thing that I want to bring up?
No.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Yeah.
In the Eyes of Laura Mars, what's his name? Tommy
Lee Jones.
His unibrow is a whole character on its own.
Tommy Lee Jones. Okay, so The Eyes of Laura Mars from 1978 is a movie starring Tommy Lee Jones and Faye Dunaway. And yes, Tommy Lee Jones has one of movie history's greatest unibrows, in my opinion.
It's a whole character on its own in the movie. I'm sure of it.
That movie is really interesting, though. That's an American film. That's it's Giallo-ish. Again, we're not nitpicking everything. We're not only watching Giallo. We're whatever. Fringe Giallo, Neo Giallo. It's all fair game, as you should know at this point of the podcast. But The Eyes of Laura Mars, the most interesting thing about that is I went to see that movie in a movie theater that was screening it a couple weeks ago, and I had no fucking clue that it was written by John Carpenter.
What? I forgot again.
Yeah, it was written by John Carpenter. Apparently not like the full script or screenplay, but I think they said it was like an 11-page like spec script or something, where it's basically the whole story laid out though. And I think this came out the same year actually that Halloween came out, I think. But
1978.
Yep, it did come out in 1978. But so I think he was tied up with Halloween at that point. But I just thought it was fascinating that there's kind of a Giallo movie that John Carpenter wrote but didn't direct, and I had no idea. And I consider myself to be a pretty fucking big John Carpenter fan.
I think this was a really fun way for us to get through January, which is one of the coldest, worst months of the year.
Absolutely.
And I'm really glad that we did this.
Yeah. And I mean, we can go on and on and on and talk more about all the other movies we watch. We mentioned the whole list of them earlier, but we don't want to take too much of your time. First and foremost, this is just a way for us to have fun. We just want to watch these movies and have an excuse to research them and learn more about them. And if we can convince any of our friends or anybody else out there listening who maybe hasn't seen some of this stuff or maybe doesn't even have interest in it, if we can convince you to at least check it out and, have a fun conversation with us, that's all we're really here for.
Yeah, exactly. This is more just for fun because we enjoy it and we wanted to find a way to enjoy it with more people.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's really kind of a passion of mine. I've been a huge fan of these weird types of films my whole life. And it just, I don't work in it. I don't do anything like that. So I just want an excuse to really dive into it more.
This is our fandom. This is where we get obsessed.
It definitely is. I guess to just close everything out here for this first episode, I just want to say, thanks for listening. If you made it this far and listened to us ramble on about fucking weird Italian movies this long, thank you so much for sticking around. Going forward, I really will. We are going to have much more focused episodes where we're going to focus on maybe 3 to 5 movies at a time. You're talking a trilogy or maybe a franchise or something like that. The scope of this is much larger, honestly, than we're really going to do going forward. So we obviously couldn't fit every single Giallo film we watched into this podcast. Otherwise, it'd be 4 hours long, and we're amateurs, and I don't think anybody wants to listen to us for that long.
I don't want to talk for 4 hours.
Same. We have other shit to do. But yeah, I mean, going forward, we're going to be much more focused. Our next episode for February, we're already kind of brainstorming and solidifying. It is going to revolve around horror love stories.
Yeah, I wanted to do something for Valentine's Day. I know a lot of people hate Valentine's Day, but to me, it is like the other Halloween.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to do going forward. I guess if you've never ever seen a Giallo film and you're curious about a Giallo film and you want to watch one Giallo film and only one Giallo film, the movie I would probably tell you to watch isn't one that we talked about or watched this year, but I would tell you to watch Dario Argento's Deep Red. I personally think that's the pinnacle of this subgenre, and if you watch that and have a good time, then by all means, dive deeper, dive really deep as we've gone. But if you watch it and it's not quite your thing, I understand why. It's definitely not for everybody, nor is pretty much anything we're going to end up covering on this podcast. But regardless, I'm having a good time doing this. I'm going to keep doing this. We're hopefully going to figure out some more like sound clips and interactivity and, audio glitches and stuff like that, hopefully to correct in the future. This is the first time I've ever done it, but it is kind of like the thing where like I just needed to sit down and hit record and do this. Otherwise, I'm never going to get around to it. I can try to make everything perfect and sit around and drive myself crazy, or I can just sit down and say, fuck it, and record, and we're off, and we're going to continue doing so. Do you have any last thoughts you want to say?
No, just keep coming back because we're going to get better at it. I'm not very good at this yet, and I'm going to keep practicing.
Yeah, we're planning to have this out pretty much anywhere audio podcasts are available. Subscribe to our YouTube page. We're getting social media set up, Instagram, TikTok, all that kind of stuff. We will be Tentacle Difficulties Pod on all of those things. But yeah, we would love to interact with you about these movies you've seen, movies you liked, you don't like, and then going forward, maybe watch some of the ones we're going to cover in the future with us because we'll be posting about what they are. Yeah,
we want to talk to you about the movies as well. We want to be able to enjoy this with other people.
Absolutely. But again, my name is Jeremy Van Zant.
And I'm Aubrey Van Zant.
And yeah, this is our first podcast ever. Thank you so much for listening. And Tentacle Difficulties Podcast will be back with episode 2 next month. Thank you.